Have you wondered why so many people have crooked teeth today? Two-thirds of teens end up in orthodontics. But just a few generations ago, that wasn't the case. And it definitely isn't genetics. Go back 100, 200 years and people had much straighter teeth. 500 years ago and almost everyone did. So what changed? Was it diet like Weston Price thought? Maybe partly, but some people eat terrible and still have great teeth. And others eat great and have horrible teeth. So in my view, the real story is biomechanics. Crooked teeth come from a collapsed skull. And the good news is that these physics work both ways. Fix the biomechanics and the skull inflates and the teeth straighten. Let's dive in. So tons of people have these crooked teeth today, right? Like it is so rare. I remember I was a child of the 80s. And, I felt like 10% of kids in my school in the 80s had braces. And it was kind of a weird thing, right? Like you kind of would avoid them. And like there was definitely no pressure to have braces. And part of that is, I was looking at some class pics from when I was a kid, like the teeth were relatively straight. Like you didn't have this massive crowding that happens so often on kids today. And you wouldn't have as many of these, these faces that were, formed by malocclusion and they have deep overbites. I mean, you sometimes would see it, but like today, I think it's more the norm than the exception when you look at kids in America today. And when I look back at I had this conversation with my parents and like when you look at their generation, like it was very rare. There was some orthodontics even back in, the people that grew up in the 50s and the 60s. But it was extremely rare and most people just didn't need it, right? Their teeth came in healthy and they didn't need much orthodontics or dentistry. So what's happening? Is this all just genetics? Well, like when I hear genetics, like I like to think of what is evolution. So evolution is genetics, it's mutation and it's natural selection. So generally, like if you believe in evolution, things get better. Population gets stronger. And you can't imagine that there's any advantage to having crooked teeth, like misdevelopment, right? So it's like a decline of a population. And therefore, I think you can just strike out genetics because, you go back 100 years ago and most people's teeth were pretty straight. And you go back 500 years ago and like you look at the fossils, 500,000 years ago, like almost everybody had, nice wide arches, straight teeth, wisdom teeth in, and it was the norm. So we went from that, very healthy teeth, skulls to where we are today where everything fell apart. And so that, directly contradicts natural selection and evolution. And therefore, in my view, you can just take genetics and you can chuck it. So the other idea that a lot of people push is like, okay, what's this Weston Price idea? And Weston Price was this nutritionist, and I think he was also a dentist. And he was around the turn of the century, like from, the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And he traveled around the world, looked at different native populations, looked at the people with the same genes in, developed more Western towns, eating a Western diet. And he concluded that the people that were in a Western diet, they had much more malocclusion and problems with their teeth than the natives. And, I looked at that, like I read a lot of his stuff back in 2015, 16, was applying a lot of this on my kid and it just didn't work. And so what I kind of concluded was that, yes, I do think that the diet plays an initial role in creating this whole biomechanical collapse process. But like what I think the bigger thing is that I think once a mother is collapsed or kind of doesn't have the correct body proportions, I think she screws up her child. And so like what you see in America now is a lot of kids are, misdeveloped from the time they're 2 or 3 years old. And, a lot of these kids, like I was living in Boston in 2018, they have these parents that are like crazy about having a very healthy diet. And regardless of the fact that from the time they were pretty much born, like they have parents who are crazy about their diet and like are using the latest nutritional trends, and still these kids are completely messed up. So you got to wonder, okay, like the best latest knowledge of dieting is not saving these kids. It must have been something that they somehow inherited, but it's not genetics because we ruled that out. So it must have been something that kind of was passed on from their parents. That's what I observed, is that generally when you had a compensated mother, she would then twist her child pre-birth. And this was reinforced by an osteopath that I had been to a few times who had worked on newborn kids and was also a dentist for many years. His name was Dr. Jackman. He basically was telling me that, he could feel a newborn's skull and body and kind of knew what compensations the mother had, as well as know what malocclusions that baby was likely to grow up with, right? So like he'd obviously felt some patterns between the mother and the newborn child, as well as the newborn child and how that child is going to evolve into an adult. So I view it that it's not genetics, it's not the diet, it is mothers compensating, passing that on to their kid. Why did the mothers compensate? Well, I think there's multiple factors. I do think diet plays a role initially, but I think the bigger role is the fact that like mothers are having kids later in life and other issues like orthodontics, which is twisting mothers, and they're having kids after 10, 20 years after they've done orthodontics. What do I think the actual problem is? I think the actual problem is biomechanics. Biomechanics meaning that is not the problem, like it is that the skull is collapsing in because there is some physics that hold up the whole skeleton, and those physics are related to the teeth. And so when you misdevelop, like the teeth never properly extrude, the arches never fully expand, right? And so you have these kids today that grow up with these partially collapsed skulls, and therefore they have twisted, compensated bodies as a result as well. And, I was fighting this with my kid from the time he was 2 years old. He was born in 2014. I was aware of this stuff because of my own issues, even in 2014. So from the time he was a 2-year-old and he was a sleep disrupted mouth breather, and I was, I didn't want him to have all the problems that I was having at that time. So I threw everything at him, right? Like I had him using a mouth guard from the time he was 2 years old. I had him trying to chew hard food. I was taping his mouth shut, and he didn't like wearing the mouth guards. So for that reason, that didn't really work. But all of the chewing the hard foods and the diet and this, and giving him, special raw milk and raw meat and all this, we did all of it. Didn't work at all. Nothing helped at all. And we didn't actually fix the problem until he was 7 years old. We put flat composite on his back teeth in Thailand. And within about a year, all his problems are fixed. Mouth breathing gone, sleep disrupted, breathing gone. All his teeth were kind of on top of each other and they started to space out nicely. So I've seen how all these theories, in my view, I proved them wrong. And the one thing that worked was these physics that I talk about. So essentially, my conclusion on crooked teeth, it is just a biomechanical problem. And in a way, you can think of it as physics. And anytime it is physics, there's a good and a bad side. Physics, it's bad when it goes down, but physics also means you can counteract the physics. And that's exactly the case in my view with biomechanics. And it's actually very easy. All you need to do is wear a simple mouth guard. And then essentially you're doing two things. You're putting some additional vertical height between the teeth. And that kind of acts like a door jamb, which stretches the soft tissue. And as this soft tissue that is inside the mouth and covering the skull stretches, the skull, in my experience, sort of inflates like a basketball. And the cranial bones go out. The jaw starts to reposition into the correct place. And I like to say that the teeth go for the ride. The teeth straighten because the bones are now going into the right place and the jaw is going into the right place, right? And so you can imagine that if you try to straighten, if everything, if I'm right and all the bones are deranged and the jaw is twisted back, and you just try to put straight teeth on this thing, what's the point, right? You're just the whole thing's a mess and you're just trying to make these teeth look nice. And that is exactly what dentistry and orthodontics does. And that's why it never holds. And that's why they create all these additional problems, health issues in these people. So, to wrap up, crooked teeth is a biomechanical problem. The skull has essentially deflated. The cranial bones are deranged. The jaw is out of position and the teeth are just reflecting that. And they're actually crooked to help keep the stability of the skull. And the only way you can correct this problem in a positive way is to use biomechanics.